There's just something special about vintage pearls. Don't you think, Abigail? I glanced up from the gleaming display case to find Madison studying me with unusual intensity. In the 8 weeks she'd been dating my son Christopher, this was the first time she'd suggested we spend time together, just the two of us, a girls' day out to Morrison & Sons, the most exclusive jewelry store in the city. They're timeless, I agreed, my fingers hovering above an elegant pearl bracelet that reminded me of one my grandmother had worn. Though I'm surprised you're interested in vintage pieces. Madison's laugh was practiced, melodic. I appreciate beauty in all forms. Christopher mentioned you have quite the eye for jewelry. The mention of my son's name didn't feel accidental. Nothing about Madison ever did. At 29, she was beautiful, ambitious, and laser-focused on securing her future. Specifically, a future with my 32-year-old son who still occupied the guest suite in my home while figuring out his next career move. "Mr. Morrison!" Madison suddenly called, waving over the silver-haired proprietor who had been discreetly observing us from behind the main counter. "We'd love to see your engagement collection when you have a moment." And there it was, the real purpose of our outing. This wasn't about bonding with her boyfriend's mother. This was strategic manipulation, using me as an unwitting accomplice in her campaign to rush Christopher to the altar. "Of course, Ms." the proprietor replied, approaching with professional courtesy. "Parker, Madison Parker." She extended her hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to being recognized and accommodated. "And this is Christopher's mother, Abigail." Something shifted in Morrison's expression as he turned toward me. Recognition, followed by a warm smile that transformed his professional demeanor into genuine pleasure. "Mrs. Cooper? Abigail Cooper?" I nodded, surprised. "Yes, though I'm not sure we've met. We haven't had the pleasure, but your reputation precedes you. Your charitable work with the Children's Symphony Fund is legendary." He clasped my hand between both of his. "My wife serves on the hospital board with Marianne Hollister, who speaks so highly of you." Madison's perfectly maintained smile faltered slightly. "How kind," I murmured, touched by the unexpected connection. "Please give my best to your wife." "I absolutely will." Morrison glanced between us, then made a decision. "Ladies, I'd be honored if you'd join me in our private viewing room. We've just received a remarkable collection I believe you'll appreciate, Mrs. Cooper." Before I could respond, he gestured to an assistant who appeared with practiced efficiency. "Rebecca, please prepare the Sapphire Room and bring refreshments for Mrs. Cooper and her guest." "The Sapphire Room," Madison interjected, her voice rising slightly. "Isn't that usually reserved for our most distinguished clients?" Morrison completed smoothly. "Right this way, please." As we followed him through the main showroom, I caught Madison's reflection in one of the mirrors, her expression a complicated mixture of confusion and annoyance. This wasn't proceeding according to her script. In her scenario, she was the sophisticated one guiding her boyfriend's dowdy mother through the intimidating world of high-end jewelry, not watching that same mother receive VIP treatment. The Sapphire Room was a revelation. Intimate lighting, illuminating walls of midnight blue velvet, a small settee positioned before a curved display counter, and a discreet champagne bar in the corner. Rebecca appeared with a silver tray bearing flutes of champagne and delicate pastries. "Mrs. Cooper, please make yourself comfortable," Morrison invited, as another associate entered with several velvet-lined trays. "These pieces just arrived from our European auction acquisition. Given your appreciation for historical craftsmanship, I thought you might enjoy them." Madison's eyes narrowed as she watched me being seated in the position of honor on the settee. This was clearly not her first visit to Morrison & Sons, yet she had never been granted access to this inner sanctuary. "Actually," she interjected with forced brightness, "we were primarily interested in engagement settings. Christopher mentioned he might be ready to take that step soon, and I thought his mother might help with selecting something appropriate for the family." I carefully kept my expression neutral, though inwardly I was startled by her brazen fabrication. Just last week, Christopher had explicitly told me he was nowhere near ready to consider marriage, especially with someone he'd known less than 2 months. "Of course," Morrison nodded diplomatically. "We can certainly view those collections as well. But first," he unveiled the first tray with a flourish, revealing a stunning array of vintage pieces. "I thought Mrs. Cooper might appreciate these, given her expertise." Madison stiffened beside me. "Expertise?" Morrison smiled. "Your mother-in-law, forgive me, Your boyfriend's mother has quite the reputation among certain circles for her discerning eye. The Children's Symphony Gala auction last year featured several pieces she selected that broke all previous fundraising records. I felt a flush of modest pleasure at the recognition of my volunteer work. After my divorce 15 years ago, I'd redirected my energies toward charitable causes, discovering an unexpected talent for curating jewelry collections donated for fundraising events. How interesting. Madison's voice had taken on a brittle quality. Christopher never mentioned his mother was a jewelry enthusiast. It's just a hobby, I demurred, reaching for one of the trays. A delicate pearl and sapphire bracelet caught my eye, its craftsmanship extraordinary. Oh, this is exquisite. As Morrison helped me fasten it around my wrist, I noticed Madison's expression darkening, her champagne untouched beside her. The careful facade of interested future daughter-in-law was cracking visibly with each moment I remained the center of attention rather than a prop in her marriage campaign. Perhaps we could see those engagement rings now, she suggested, her patience clearly waning, since that's what we actually came for. Morrison's professional smile never wavered. Of course, Rebecca will assist with that momentarily. But first, Mrs. Cooper, do try on the matching earrings. They're quite enough. Madison's voice sliced through the refined atmosphere like a discordant note. This is ridiculous. We've been here 30 minutes and you're fawning over her like she's royalty. She's nobody, just a divorced housewife living off alimony. The room froze in shocked silence. Even Madison seemed surprised by her own outburst, though not enough to retreat. In one swift motion, she grabbed my wrist and yanked, unfastening the bracelet with such force that I gasped in pain. You're making a fool of yourself, she hissed, dangling the bracelet contemptuously, pretending to be some kind of jewelry expert. What a pathetic joke. You're nothing but a clown. A sad, desperate clown trying to seem important. As the bracelet slipped from her fingers to the plush carpet, the door to the sapphire room opened. A commanding figure filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that spoke of wealth worn with comfortable familiarity. His deep voice cut through the room with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to immediate respect. "Touch my wife again," he stated with deadly calm, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Madison, "and see what happens." For one suspended moment, nobody moved. Madison's face drained of color as she registered the man framed in the doorway, his imposing height, the unmistakable authority in his bearing, and most significantly, the cold fury in his eyes. I recognized him instantly, though we'd never met. Joseph Walker, founder and CEO of Walker Grand Hotels, whose face regularly graced business magazines and society pages. The kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. I'm sorry, Madison stammered, recognition dawning in her wide eyes. There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't realize that she's my wife. Joseph stepped fully into the room, his gaze shifting briefly to me with such perfect simulation of concerned affection that I felt my breath catch. Or you didn't realize someone would object to your manhandling her. Without conscious thought, I slipped into the role he'd created. Survival instinct, perhaps, or simple appreciation for his unexpected intervention. "Darling," I said, my voice carrying just the right note of relieved gratitude. "I wasn't expecting you for another hour." Joseph moved to my side with smooth confidence, helping me to my feet with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his intimidating presence. His hand at the small of my back felt steadying, almost familiar. "Meeting ended early," he replied, his eyes conveying a silent message. "Play along." Lucky timing, it seems. Madison had gone from pale to ashen. "Mr. Walker, I had no idea. Mrs. Cooper never mentioned. I would never have—" "And yet you did," he cut her off, voice deceptively soft. "Called my wife a clown, I believe? Questioned her worth? In my experience, Ms. Parker," she whispered. "Madison Parker. Ms. Parker, in my experience, people reveal their true character not when things are going their way, but precisely in moments like these." He bent to retrieve the bracelet from the floor, examining it before placing it carefully in my palm, closing my fingers around it with a gesture both protective and possessive. The performance was masterful. I found myself wondering if he'd had theatrical training or if commanding a room came naturally to men of his stature. "It won't happen again," Madison promised, desperation evident in every syllable. Please, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Christopher, Abigail's son, and I are practically engaged. We're practically family. Practically, Joseph echoed, the single word somehow devastating in its skepticism. Morrison, who had observed this unexpected drama with professional discretion, finally spoke. Perhaps Miss Parker would like to view our engagement collection in the main showroom while Mrs. Cooper recovers from this unfortunate incident. The graceful exit opportunity wasn't lost on Madison, who nodded frantically. Yes, that would be perfect. Abigail, I'm truly sorry. Mr. Walker, it was an honor to meet you, despite the circumstances. Neither of us acknowledged her apology as Rebecca escorted her from the Sapphire Room, the door closing with a decisive click behind them. In the sudden quiet, Joseph Walker stepped back, a respectful distance opening between us now that our audience had departed. I apologize for the presumption, Mrs. Cooper, he said, his voice warmer but still formal. It seemed the most expedient way to address the situation. No apology necessary, Mr. Walker. I found myself smiling despite the lingering shock of Madison's behavior. That was quite the gallant rescue. Joseph, please. He returned my smile, the severity of his expression transforming into something unexpectedly charming. And it was my pleasure. Though I must admit, I've never acquired a wife quite so suddenly before. A surprised laugh escaped me. Nor have I found myself married without my knowledge. Abigail Cooper. I extended my hand, which he took with a courtly inclination of his head. I know. At my raised eyebrow, he clarified. Morrison mentioned your name when I arrived for my appointment. I was waiting in the adjacent room when I overheard the disturbance. Morrison cleared his throat discreetly. I'll give you both a moment of privacy. Mrs. Cooper, please take all the time you need. The bracelet, of course, remains available for your consideration whenever you're ready. After he departed, Joseph gestured to the settee. May I join you? I believe we have a rather unusual introduction to process. As we sat, I studied him more carefully. Distinguished was the word that came to mind. Silver hair that enhanced rather than aged him, lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter rather than hardship, and an ease within himself that suggested a man comfortable with his place in the world. Thank you, I said simply. She caught me completely off guard. Family can do that, he observed, his perceptiveness surprising me. Though I gather she's not actually family yet? My son's girlfriend of 8 weeks, I confirmed. Though according to her, they're practically engaged. Joseph's laugh was unexpectedly warm. Something tells me your son might have a different perspective on that timeline. Indeed he would. I hesitated, then added, I should probably warn him about what happened here today. Over dinner, perhaps? Joseph suggested, then immediately held up a hand. Forgive me. That was presumptuous after an already presumptuous introduction. I found myself considering his suggestion with more seriousness than I would have expected. There was something refreshingly direct about him, a clarity of purpose without games or manipulation, the precise opposite of what I'd just experienced with Madison. Actually, I heard myself saying, dinner would be lovely, as a proper thank you for your timely intervention. And perhaps to discuss how I should break the news to my son that I've apparently married a hotel magnate without his knowledge. Joseph's smile deepened, genuine pleasure lighting his eyes. I know just the place, assuming you're comfortable being seen with your new husband, of course. For the first time since Madison's outburst, I felt the tension fully leave my body, replaced by an unexpected flutter of anticipation. Well, I replied with newfound lightness, we might as well enjoy our honeymoon period while it lasts. Joseph's chosen restaurant was discreetly elegant, a hidden gem tucked away from the city's more ostentatious dining establishments. No sign announced its presence, just a simple brass plate beside a heavy oak door that read, Oliveira's, one of the city's best-kept secrets, Joseph explained, as the maitre d' led us to a secluded corner table. Family-owned for 3 generations. The kind of place where you'll never see a cell phone at the table or hear anyone name-dropping. How refreshing, I replied, appreciating the understated sophistication. White tablecloths, muted lighting from actual candles, and enough space between tables that conversations remained private. Once seated with menus and wine suggestions, I studied Joseph more carefully. So, Mr. Walker. Joseph, he corrected gently. Joseph, I amended. Do you often ride to the rescue of strange women being berated in jewelry stores, or was today a special occasion? His laugh lines deepened. I assure you, today was unprecedented. Though I must confess, I was already aware of who you were before the incident. This surprised me. Oh? Morrison mentioned your name when I arrived for my appointment, something about the Symphony Fund. It registered because I've contributed to their annual gala, though we've never crossed paths there. The coincidence made me smile. I've chaired the auction committee for the past 5 years. Small world. Indeed, he held my gaze a moment longer than strictly necessary. Though I suspect you and I have been moving in adjacent circles for some time without intersecting. There was something unexpectedly compelling about his direct manner. No games, no pretense, just straightforward interest. After 15 years of navigating post-divorce dating scenes filled with agenda-laden interactions, the simplicity was almost disorienting. And what brought you to Morrison's today? I asked. Since we're now apparently married, I should probably know what my husband shops for at exclusive jewelers. His expression softened with remembered affection. My sister's 70th birthday next month. She's always been my strongest supporter, from my first struggling hotel to the international chain. I wanted something special for her. The genuine warmth in his voice revealed more about him than perhaps he realized. A successful man who prioritized family relationships spoke volumes about his character. And you? He inquired. Before Miss Parker's intervention, what brought you there? I sighed, the memory of Madison's scheme returning. A manipulation, it seems. Madison orchestrated the outing, presumably to plant marriage ideas regarding my son. I suspect she thought I'd be so dazzled by expensive jewelry that I'd start dropping hints to Christopher about proposals. Instead, she discovered you were already known and respected there, Joseph observed. That clearly wasn't in her script. No, I agreed as our wine arrived. Madison has a very specific view of me as the boring, irrelevant mother who should be grateful for her attention. Finding out I had any sort of independent identity beyond Christopher's mom threw her completely. Joseph raised his glass in a small toast. To independent identities, then. As we clinked glasses, I felt an unexpected flutter of connection. There was something liberating about sharing a meal with someone who had no preconceptions about me, no shared history to navigate, no family dynamics to consider, just two adults enjoying each other's company. I should warn you, I said after our first course arrived, I may need to call my son after dinner. Given Madison's temperament, I suspect she's already crafting a version of today's events that paints her as the victim. Joseph nodded thoughtfully. Family dynamics are always complicated. Do you and your son have a close relationship? We do, though it's been tested since he moved back home last year after his startup collapsed. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. Christopher is brilliant, but struggles with follow-through. Madison is his third relationship this year and easily the most determined. And his father's involvement? Minimal, by his choice. The divorce was 15 years ago, and Edward's new family in Seattle occupies most of his attention. Joseph absorbed this without judgment. And your other children? You mentioned just the one son earlier. My daughters, Emma and Sophia, live on opposite coasts. Emma's a pediatrician in Boston. Sophia works in environmental law in San Francisco. Pride warmed my voice. They're both wonderfully independent, which means I rarely see them outside of holidays. They sound remarkable, Joseph said, genuine interest in his expression. They must take after their mother. The compliment, delivered without flattery, brought unexpected warmth to my cheeks. Kind of you to say, though you know very little about me, beyond my apparent ability to attract drama in jewelry stores. I know you volunteer significant time to children's causes, he countered. I know Morrison holds you in high esteem, which says something about both your character and your expertise. And I know you handled a deeply uncomfortable situation today with remarkable grace. His observations, specific and thoughtful rather than generic flattery, struck me. This man actually paid attention, a rarer quality than one might expect. Your turn, I said, deflecting from my sudden self-consciousness. Tell me something about Joseph Walker that isn't in the business profiles. He considered this, his expression thoughtful. I make terrible pancakes but excellent omelets. I collect first edition mystery novels. And despite owning hotels around the world, I'm happiest at my lake cabin in Vermont, where the internet connection is questionable at best. Each detail revealed a man more nuanced than his public persona suggested. As our dinner progressed through excellent food and surprisingly easy conversation, I found myself genuinely enjoying his company. His dry humor, his thoughtful questions, his evident interest in my responses. By dessert, I realized with some surprise that I hadn't once checked my phone or thought about Madison's drama in over an hour. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was simply present, engaged in the moment with someone who seemed equally engaged with me. When Joseph insisted on driving me home despite my protest that I could easily call a car service, I found myself accepting with unexpected pleasure. After all, he said with that warm smile that was becoming familiar, what kind of husband would I be if I didn't see my wife safely home? Joseph's Bentley had just pulled away from my driveway when I noticed Christopher's car parked on the street, unusual for a Tuesday evening when he typically worked late. The living room lights blazed despite the hour, another deviation from routine. I had barely closed the front door when my son's voice came from the direction of the kitchen, tight with barely contained emotion. "Mom, is that you? We need to talk." The "we" was immediately apparent. Madison sat at my kitchen island, eyes reddened in a perfect simulation of distress, while Christopher paced nearby, his expression thunderous. They'd clearly been waiting for my return, a coordinated ambush. "Good evening," I said calmly, setting my purse on the entryway table. "This is unexpected." "Unexpected?" Christopher's voice rose. "You humiliate Madison at some fancy jewelry store, and you call that unexpected?" I evaluated the scene with newfound clarity. Madison had arrived first with her version of events, one that obviously cast her as the innocent victim of my apparent snobbery. "I see Madison's shared her perspective on today's outing," I observed, moving into the kitchen with deliberate composure. "I'm curious what exactly she told you happened." Madison sniffled delicately, reaching for Christopher's hand as if requiring support. "I just wanted us to have a nice day together, to bond, and then you were so different at the store, cold. When I admired those engagement rings, you practically sneered." My eyebrows rose of their own accord. "Is that what happened?" "And then," she continued, voice quavering perfectly, "when I tried to comfort you because the salesperson was ignoring you, you completely overreacted. Had security remove me. It was humiliating, Christopher. All because I wanted to include your mother in our happiness. The fabrication was breathtaking in its audacity. I might have admired her creativity if it weren't so calculating." Christopher ran a hand through his hair, his tell for extreme agitation since childhood. "Mom, what the hell? Madison was trying to include you in something important, and you went full Ice Queen on her? That's not like you." "No," I agreed quietly. "It's not like me at all." Madison must have sensed dangerous waters in my calm, because she quickly added, "I know you've been lonely since the divorce. Maybe seeing happy couples is difficult. I understand. I really do. We can forget the whole thing happened." The patronizing tone made my decision easier. I'd planned to speak with Christopher privately, to gently open his eyes to Madison's manipulations. But this performance demanded a different approach. "Christopher," I said evenly, "would you like to hear what actually happened today? Because Madison has just delivered a masterclass in creative fiction." Madison's eyes narrowed fractionally before widening in manufactured hurt. "See? This is exactly what I mean. So defensive, so hostile." "Actually," I continued, pulling out my phone, "let's start with why Madison really arranged today's outing. Not for bonding, but because she wanted to manipulate me into pressuring you toward a proposal." Christopher blinked, thrown off script. "What? No, that's not..." "She told the jewelry consultant we were there to look at engagement settings because you were ready to take that step soon. That you'd discussed marriage with her." "I never..." Christopher's confusion was evident. "We've only been dating 8 weeks. I've never mentioned marriage." Madison shifted tactics instantly, tears vanishing. "It was a little white lie to get better service, Chris. Jewelry stores treat engagement customers better. It wasn't serious. Then why tell me you were going there to bond with Abigail?" His voice had taken on a new edge. "Those are very different stories, Madison." She straightened, abandoning the victim pose entirely. "Does it matter? The point is, your mother embarrassed me in front of everyone, made a huge scene when I was just trying to be friendly." "A scene," I repeated thoughtfully. Interesting characterization from someone who called me a pathetic clown and physically grabbed jewelry off my wrist. Christopher's head snapped toward Madison. You did what? Her composure fractured visibly. She's exaggerating. I barely touched her. I have the bruise forming on my wrist if you'd like to see, I offered mildly. And I'm sure Morrison & Sons has security footage if there's any question about what transpired. Madison's expression shifted to cold calculation. Fine. I got upset when they treated her like royalty while ignoring me. It was embarrassing, but then her boyfriend or whatever showed up and threatened me. Actually threatened me, Christopher. Some old rich guy claiming to be her husband. Husband? Christopher looked completely lost now. Mom, what is she talking about? I sighed, seeing no graceful way around the truth. Joseph Walker happened to be at Morrison's when Madison created her scene. He intervened when she became physically aggressive. Joseph Walker, Christopher repeated blankly. The hotel guy? From the business magazines? The same. Madison's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You seemed awfully cozy with him for someone you supposedly just met. And where have you been all evening? It's nearly 11. We had dinner, I replied simply, as a thank you for his intervention. It seemed the civilized thing to do. Christopher studied my face with new awareness. You had dinner with Joseph Walker, the billionaire. Millionaire, I believe, I corrected. And yes, he's quite charming when not defending strangers from hostile jewelry store encounters. Madison's face had transformed completely, naked calculation replacing any pretense of emotional distress. So that's where you've been all night, on a date with some rich guy you just met, while I've been here worried sick about our relationship. The manipulative pivot was almost impressive. Christopher, however, was no longer following her lead. His expression had shifted from anger to thoughtful assessment as he looked between us. Madison, he said finally, I think you should go home. We can talk tomorrow when everyone's calmer. But Chris, please, his voice was firm. I need to speak with my mother, alone. Her exit was a masterpiece of reluctance and wounded dignity, complete with a trembling kiss on Christopher's cheek and a tearful glance back from the doorway. The performance would have been more convincing if I hadn't seen how quickly she'd switched emotional displays throughout the evening. When the door closed behind her, Christopher turned to me with genuine confusion. Mom, what the hell is going on? Madison shows up hysterical, saying you humiliated her. Then you come home late from dinner with a famous billionaire who pretended to be your husband? None of this makes sense. I moved to the refrigerator, suddenly aware of how exhausting the day had been. It's a rather long story. Would you like some tea while I explain? So let me get this straight, Christopher said, cradling his mug of tea as we sat in the living room. Madison took you to the jewelry store specifically to manipulate you into pushing me toward proposing to her? That appears to have been the plan, I confirmed. She seemed quite thrown when the staff recognized me and offered VIP treatment. It didn't fit her narrative of being the sophisticated one guiding her boyfriend's dowdy mother. Christopher winced. Has she always been this calculating? How did I miss it? She's skillful, I offered, not wanting to wound his pride further. And you've been focused on rebuilding after the startup failure. Sometimes we see what we need to see in relationships. He ran a hand through his hair again, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood that my heart softened. At 32, my son was still finding his way, still vulnerable to those who recognized his insecurities. And then, Joseph Walker just happened to be there? The Joseph Walker? And he pretended to be your husband to rescue you from Madison's tantrum? I couldn't help smiling at his incredulity. Life occasionally delivers moments worthy of a film script. This was apparently one of them. And then you went to dinner with him, Christopher continued, processing. Just like that. It seemed the appropriate way to thank him, I replied, though I recognized the inadequacy of this explanation even as I offered it. The truth was both simpler and more complex. I had wanted to spend more time with Joseph, a realization that still surprised me. Christopher studied me with newfound attention. You like him. I enjoyed his company, I acknowledged carefully. He's intelligent, straightforward, and refreshingly free of agenda. Unlike Madison, Christopher added grimly. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He set down his mug with a decisive click. I've been an idiot, haven't I? She's been pushing for keys to the house, suggesting we combine finances for efficiency, dropping hints about engagement rings, all after less than 2 months of dating. His awareness both relieved and concerned me. Christopher, I didn't tell you this to turn you against Madison. That's your relationship to evaluate. Mom, his expression was wry. She physically grabbed you and called you a clown in public, then came here and lied about the entire incident. I think we're past the point of gentle evaluation. The blunt assessment reassured me that despite his sometimes directionless approach to life, my son's moral compass remained intact. What concerns me more, he continued, surprising me, is that you felt you couldn't tell me directly about her behavior. That you were planning to gently open my eyes rather than just saying, your girlfriend is manipulative and aggressive. This observation caught me off guard. I didn't want to seem like the interfering mother who dislikes her son's girlfriend. Because Madison has been positioning you that way, he concluded with unexpected insight, setting up a dynamic where any criticism from you would seem like jealousy or possessiveness. I blinked at his perception. That's remarkably astute. I'm not completely oblivious, he said, with a self-deprecating smile, just occasionally blinded by a pretty face and well-executed flattery. We sat in companionable silence for a moment. The tension that had greeted my arrival completely dissipated. When Christopher spoke again, his tone had shifted to cautious curiosity. So, Joseph Walker, he's what, around your age? I believe he's 68, I replied, immediately regretting the readiness of my answer. We didn't discuss ages specifically. Christopher's eyebrows rose. But you discussed enough other things to have dinner last until nearly 11. Heat rose unexpectedly to my cheeks. We had a great deal to talk about after our unusual introduction. Uh-huh. His expression turned playful, a welcome change from the earlier distress. And will you be having more things to talk about in the future? He did mention showing me his newest hotel property, I admitted. The restoration of that historic building downtown. Apparently, they've preserved some remarkable architectural details. Christopher's smile widened. So, you have a second date? It's not a date, I protested automatically, then paused. At least, I don't think it's a date. It's a professional courtesy. Mom, Christopher's voice gentled. It's okay if it is a date. You know that, right? You're allowed to have a personal life. His permission, though unnecessary, touched something vulnerable within me. Since the divorce, I'd oriented my entire existence around my children, my volunteer work, maintaining the home that had become Christopher's safety net. The possibility of prioritizing my own romantic interests felt almost transgressive. It's been a very long time since I've dated anyone, I said quietly. And Joseph Walker is, well, he's Joseph Walker. His world is rather different from mine. Is it? Christopher challenged gently. You both serve on arts boards. You're both at the stage of life where your children are grown. And apparently, you both shop at fancy jewelry stores and enjoy the same restaurants. Put that way, the gap between our worlds seemed less daunting. Still, I tempered my expectations. One dinner and a potential tour of a hotel restoration hardly constitutes a relationship, Christopher. But it's a start, he insisted. And Mom, I haven't seen you blush like that in, well, maybe ever. I touched my cheeks self-consciously, annoyed to find them still warm. It's been an unusual day. Christopher's expression sobered. About Madison, I need to end things. Cleanly. Someone who treats you that way isn't someone I want in my life. Relief washed through me, though I tried not to show it too plainly. That's your decision to make, but I appreciate the sentiment behind it. He stood, stretching with the lanky grace he'd had since adolescence. I should get some sleep. Early meeting tomorrow with that tech startup I told you about. Might be a job opportunity. As he bent to kiss my cheek, a gesture that had become rarer as he'd established his adult identity, he added, And Mom, I think it's great that you're making new friends. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are. After he'd gone upstairs, I remained in the living room, turning the day's events over in my mind. Madison's shocking behavior, Joseph's unexpected intervention, the dinner that had stretched for hours as conversation flowed with surprising ease. My phone chimed with a text message. Home safely? I realized I never confirmed our tour of the Walker Grand Restoration for Thursday afternoon. Still interested? Joseph. I found myself smiling as I typed my reply. Safely home, though to an unexpected confrontation with Christopher and Madison. She'd already arrived with her version of events. All resolved now. And yes, Thursday sounds lovely. His response came almost immediately. Confrontation? Everything all right? I'm free for lunch tomorrow if you'd like to talk about it. The prompt offer of support, without pressure or expectation, warmed me unexpectedly. I hesitated only briefly before responding. Lunch would be nice, and don't worry, the confrontation ended better than it began. My son sees more clearly now. As I prepared for bed, I found myself contemplating the strange turns life could take. 24 hours ago, Joseph Walker had been a name I recognized only from business news. Madison had seemed merely ambitious rather than manipulative, and I had been contentedly settled in my routine of volunteer work and quiet evenings at home. Now everything felt slightly altered. Familiar landscapes viewed from a new angle, revealing unexpected possibilities I hadn't considered in years. Carmela's Cafe occupied the ground floor of a renovated brownstone, its patio tables shaded by canvas umbrellas in crisp navy and white. Joseph was already seated when I arrived, rising immediately as he caught sight of me. His courtly manners, standing when a woman arrived or left the table, opening doors, walking on the street side of the sidewalk, belonged to an earlier era, yet never felt performative or exaggerated. "You look lovely," he greeted me, his smile warming his eyes. "I hope you don't mind the outdoor seating. The weather seemed too perfect to waste." "It's ideal," I agreed, settling into the chair he held for me. The spring air carried the scent of nearby flowering trees, a welcome respite from air conditioning. After we'd ordered a Mediterranean salad for me, grilled salmon for him, Joseph leaned forward slightly. "So, tell me about this confrontation." I was concerned. I recounted the previous evening's drama, from Madison's theatrical tears to Christopher's eventual clarity. Joseph listened attentively, his expression thoughtful. "Your son sounds perceptive," he observed when I'd finished. Once he had all the information. "He is," I agreed, though sometimes slow to recognize manipulation when it's wrapped in flattery and attention. "A common human vulnerability," Joseph noted without judgment. "We all have our blind spots, especially when it comes to romantic relationships." The waiter arrived with our meals, providing a natural pause in the conversation. As we began eating, Joseph asked, "Has Madison made any attempt to contact you today?" 3 text messages, increasingly desperate in tone, I confirmed. First apologizing for the misunderstanding, then suggesting we start fresh for Christopher's sake, and finally proposing brunch this weekend to clear the air. Joseph's eyebrows rose, persistent. "And calculating," I added. "She doesn't know that Christopher has already decided to end things. She's trying to neutralize me as a threat before he fully processes what happened." "Strategic," Joseph acknowledged, "though ultimately futile if your son has seen through the facade." Christopher texted that he's meeting her this evening to end things. He seemed quite resolved. Joseph studied me over his water glass. "And how do you feel about all this? Being thrust into the middle of your son's relationship drama couldn't have been pleasant." The question was refreshingly direct. Most people would have focused exclusively on the Madison situation or Christopher's reactions, skipping over my own experience entirely. "Relieved," I admitted, but also somewhat guilty for feeling relieved. No mother wants to be the catalyst for her child's breakup, even when it's clearly for the best. Joseph nodded. "The maternal instinct to protect your children from pain, even necessary pain." "Exactly. Though at 32, Christopher hardly needs my protection." "Don't be so sure," Joseph replied with a wry smile. "My sister still tries to protect me at 68. I suspect it's a lifelong impulse." This glimpse into his family dynamics intrigued me. "You've mentioned your sister several times. You must be close." "Elizabeth has been my rock since our parents died," he confirmed. "She's the reason I started the hotel business in the first place." I tilted my head questioningly, and he elaborated. "After college, I was working in commercial real estate, mostly office buildings. Lizzie was diagnosed with lupus, and her medical treatments required frequent travel to specialists. The accommodations in these medical centers were always abysmal, sterile, depressing, the last thing someone needs when facing health challenges." His expression softened with remembered determination. "I decided patients and their families deserved better. Converted an old building near Mayo Clinic into my first Walker Grand, luxury accommodations specifically designed for long-term medical stays with kitchenettes, comfortable workspaces for family members, and absolutely no hospital aesthetics. That's not the origin story I would have expected for a luxury hotel chain," I admitted, touched by the personal motivation behind his business empire. "Most people assume I started with business travelers or tourism," he acknowledged. "The medical focus is still there, though less prominent now. Every Walker Grand maintains a foundation suite in each property, reserved for families facing catastrophic medical situations. The revelation shifted my understanding of him. This wasn't wealth built on abstract market opportunities, but on addressing a deeply personal need, making difficult life moments more bearable for others. Your sister must be very proud of what you've built, I said. She reminds me regularly that she's responsible for my success, he replied with affectionate humor. Hence the birthday shopping expedition that led to our unconventional meeting. Our conversation meandered through lunch, touching on my volunteer work with the Symphony Fund, his latest hotel restoration, and eventually circling back to our planned tour on Thursday. Fair warning, Joseph said as we finished our coffee. The building is still actively under construction in some areas. I'll provide appropriate safety gear, but if you'd prefer to wait until it's further along, I'd love to see it in process, I assured him. The transformation is always the most interesting part. Something in my response seemed to please him. Most people only want to see the finished product, all evidence of effort and challenge carefully concealed. Then they miss the most compelling part of the story, I countered. How something becomes what it is matters more than its final appearance. Joseph's gaze held mine with unexpected intensity. Exactly. As he drove me home after lunch, a comfortable silence settled between us, the kind that felt neither empty nor demanding, just a peaceful shared space. When he pulled up to my driveway, I was surprised to see Christopher's car already there. He typically worked until evening on Wednesdays. It seems my son is home early, I observed, puzzled. Joseph glanced at the modest Tudor-style house that had been my home for 30 years. Perhaps he decided not to wait until evening to speak with Madison. Perhaps? I gathered my purse, then turned to Joseph with genuine appreciation. Thank you for lunch, and for listening to my family drama without judgment. I've enjoyed every minute, he replied, with a warmth that suggested complete sincerity. And I'm looking forward to Thursday. As I reached for the door handle, Joseph added, Abigail, whatever's happening with your son, remember you're not responsible for managing adult relationships that aren't your own. Your compassion is admirable, but don't let it become a burden. The insight was so precisely what I needed to hear that it momentarily rendered me speechless. For years, I'd shouldered responsibility for smoothing family tensions, anticipating needs, creating harmony often at the expense of my own preferences. Joseph had somehow recognized this pattern after just 2 conversations. I'll try to remember that, I said finally, though old habits die hard. His smile was understanding. The most worthwhile changes usually require practice. As Joseph's car disappeared down the street, I approached my front door with curiosity about Christopher's unexpected presence. When I entered, I found him in the kitchen, aggressively chopping vegetables with more force than the carrots required. You're home early, I observed, setting down my purse. Everything all right? He looked up, his expression a complex mixture of anger and relief. I ended things with Madison. Just now, not tonight as planned. What happened? Christopher's knife paused mid-chop. She showed up at my office with engagement ring brochures and a suggestion that we drive to Vermont this weekend to spontaneously elope. I blinked, momentarily speechless at the audacity. That's remarkably tone-deaf after yesterday's events. It gets better, he continued grimly. When I told her I knew what really happened at the jewelry store, she tried to convince me that you'd manipulated Joseph Walker into defending you, that you'd somehow orchestrated the entire confrontation to make her look bad. That's quite the conspiracy theory, I observed, keeping my voice neutral despite the absurdity. Apparently I'm both pathetically irrelevant and diabolically calculating. Christopher's laugh held little humor. That's exactly what doesn't make sense about her version. She can't decide if you're a sad, lonely divorcee or a master manipulator with wealthy men at your beck and call. The characterization stung slightly, though I knew it came from Madison rather than my son. And how did she take the breakup? He resumed chopping, his movement still sharp with residual tension. First denial, then tears, then threats about how I'll regret losing her. The full spectrum. I finally had to ask security to escort her out when she refused to leave my office. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. That couldn't have been easy. Christopher sighed, his anger seeming to deflate. The worst part is how clearly I see the red flags now. They were there from the beginning. The love bombing, the rushed intimacy, the subtle isolation from friends who weren't supportive enough of our relationship. I moved to the refrigerator, retrieving ingredients to complement whatever stress-cooking project he'd initiated. Don't be too hard on yourself. Manipulative people are skilled at what they do. I guess he dumped the chopped vegetables into a bowl with unnecessary force. Anyway, that's over. Completely over. As we prepared dinner together, a ritual from his childhood that still emerged in times of stress, I debated whether to mention my upcoming tour with Joseph. Christopher resolved my dilemma by noticing my distraction. "You seemed deep in thought just now," he observed. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about Thursday," I admitted. "Joseph is showing me the Walker Grand Restoration downtown." Christopher's expression lightened. "So the second date is still on. Good." "It's not a date," I protested automatically, then caught myself. "Or perhaps it is. I'm not entirely sure, which probably indicates how long it's been since I've dated anyone." My son's smile was genuine for the first time since I'd arrived home. "Mom, a man doesn't offer private tours of his multi-million-dollar restoration projects to women he's not interested in. Trust me on this." As we continued cooking, I found myself contemplating the possibility that Christopher was right, that Joseph's interest might extend beyond friendly gratitude for an unusual shared experience. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a high dive after decades away from the pool. But perhaps it was time to remember what it felt like to take the plunge. The Walker Grand Restoration project dominated the corner of Hawthorne and Fifth, its imposing limestone facade partially obscured by sophisticated scaffolding. Originally built in 1928 as First Metropolitan Bank, the building had cycled through various incarnations: financial headquarters, government offices, and briefly an ill-conceived shopping arcade, before standing vacant for nearly a decade. Joseph waited for me at a temporary entrance marked Site Office, his usual immaculate suit replaced by well-tailored dark jeans and a charcoal button-down. Despite the more casual attire, he maintained that indefinable air of authority that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "Right on time," he greeted me with evident pleasure. "I've been looking forward to showing you this project. It's something of a personal passion." "I've been looking forward to seeing it," I replied truthfully. The building had been a downtown landmark throughout my life, its gradual decline a source of community concern until Walker Hotels announced its acquisition 2 years ago. Joseph handed me a white construction helmet and a high-visibility vest that matched his own. "Safety first," he explained. "Some areas are still very much active construction zones." As we entered the main lobby, I gasped involuntarily. Soaring ceilings with restored Art Deco moldings arched over a space simultaneously grand and intimate. The original marble floors had been meticulously cleaned and repaired, their geometric patterns complementing brass fixtures that gleamed as if newly minted. "This is extraordinary," I breathed, turning slowly to absorb the details. "You've maintained the original character while somehow making it feel contemporary." Joseph's expression warmed with obvious pride. That was exactly our goal, honoring the building's heritage while ensuring it meets modern expectations. He gestured toward an elegant reception area. The original bank teller stations have been repurposed as the hotel check-in. The brass detailing is all original, just restored. For the next hour, Joseph guided me through the building's transformation, guest rooms fashioned from former offices with original woodwork and windows carefully preserved, the grand ballroom that had once been the bank's main floor, its massive chandeliers rebuilt with LED technology that mimicked the warm glow of original incandescent bulbs, the rooftop garden created where mechanical equipment had once cluttered the skyline. Throughout the tour, I was struck by Joseph's intimate knowledge of every detail, not just the business aspects, but the craftsmanship involved. He knew the origin of the replacement marble when original pieces couldn't be salvaged, the name of the master woodworker who had recreated damaged moldings, the specific paint formulation developed to match the original colors while meeting modern environmental standards. "You're unusually hands-on for a CEO," I observed, as we paused in what would become the hotel's signature restaurant. "Most executives at your level would delegate these details to project managers." Joseph smiled, a hint of self-consciousness in his expression. "This building is special to me. My father used to bring me here when it was still First Metropolitan. He'd do his banking while I stared at the murals and ceiling details, inventing stories about the people depicted. This glimpse of the boy within the successful man touched me unexpectedly. So this restoration is personal. Very much so. He guided me toward a partially completed bar area where original bank vault doors had been incorporated into the design. When the property became available, I moved faster than our usual acquisition timeline. Some of my board thought I was being sentimental rather than strategic. And were you? I asked, genuinely curious. Both, he admitted with refreshing candor. The location and structure made business sense, but I would have found a way to justify it regardless. Some opportunities transcend spreadsheet logic. The philosophy resonated deeply, acknowledging practical realities while allowing space for emotional connection and meaning. It was a balance I'd always valued, but rarely heard articulated by successful business leaders. As our tour continued to the upper floors, Joseph pointed out a door at the end of a nearly completed hallway. I've saved something special for last, our signature suite. He used an electronic keycard to open the door, revealing a stunning two-story space occupying the building's northwest corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased dramatic city views, while a floating staircase led to a loft-style bedroom overlooking the main living area. "This is breathtaking," I said, moving toward the windows. The afternoon sunlight streamed through original leaded glass transoms, casting prismatic patterns across the polished wood floors. "The Elizabeth Suite," Joseph explained, joining me at the window. "Named for my sister, of course." "Of course," I echoed with a smile. "She'll be honored. She's more likely to complain that the closets aren't big enough," he replied with affectionate humor. "Lizzie has never been impressed by gestures named after her. She prefers practical considerations." "A woman after my own heart," I observed, turning to take in the suite's thoughtful details. Reading nooks built into window embrasures, custom shelving that highlighted rather than concealed the room's architectural features, lighting designed to complement rather than compete with natural illumination. "I think you'd like each other," Joseph said, watching me explore the space. "You share a similar no-nonsense approach to life, and a deep appreciation for beauty that serves a purpose rather than existing merely for show." The observation was surprisingly insightful and accurate. Throughout my life, I'd been drawn to objects and spaces that balanced form and function, aesthetics and practicality. It was one reason I'd never fully embraced the purely decorative approach favored by many in my social circle. "When does the hotel officially open?" I asked, reluctantly moving toward the door as Joseph checked his watch. 8 weeks, he replied. "Though this suite will be completed ahead of schedule. I'm considering hosting a small preview dinner here for local arts patrons who supported the preservation efforts. Perhaps you might help me compile the guest list?" The request, professional yet personal, involving me in his world without presumption, felt perfectly calibrated. "I'd be happy to," I agreed. The Symphony Fund Board includes several preservation advocates who would appreciate seeing the restoration up close. As we descended in the construction elevator, Joseph suddenly asked, "Would you have dinner with me tonight? There's a small Italian place near here that somehow survives despite refusing to take reservations or credit cards. Best risotto outside of Milan." The spontaneous invitation caught me off guard, though pleasantly so. "I'd love to," I replied before self-consciousness could intervene. "Though I'm hardly dressed for dining out." I gestured to my casual slacks and blouse, chosen for practicality rather than elegance. Joseph's smile deepened. "Perfect for Vittorio's. It's deliberately unpretentious. The owner believes atmosphere comes from food and conversation, not dress codes or designer flatware." 2 hours later, seated at a worn wooden table in a restaurant no larger than my living room, I understood exactly what Joseph meant. Vittorio's occupied the ground floor of a narrow brick building, its interior illuminated by simple pendant lights and candles in wine bottles. No tablecloths, no elaborate place settings, just phenomenal food served on mismatched china by the owner's family members. "This risotto is extraordinary," I acknowledged after my first bite. "Worth every bit of the 20-minute preparation time." "Vittorio refuses to pre-cook or rush the process," Joseph explained, visibly pleased by my appreciation. "He believes proper risotto requires patience and attention that can't be hurried." A philosophy that applies to many worthwhile things, I observed, accepting a piece of crusty bread he offered from the shared basket. Joseph's eyes met mine with that direct gaze that seemed to see beyond social niceties. Indeed it does. As our dinner progressed, conversation flowed with the same natural ease I'd experienced during our previous encounters. We discovered shared perspectives on arts education, similar taste in mystery novels, and a mutual appreciation for jazz that had surprised us both in our younger years. My college roommates thought I was painfully old-fashioned, I admitted, laughing at the memory. While they were blasting rock music, I was playing Ella Fitzgerald and Duke Ellington. I would have fit right in with your outdated tastes, Joseph replied with a smile, though I confess a particular weakness for early Miles Davis that might have tested even your patience. This glimpse of his younger self, already moving against prevailing trends, following his own preferences rather than popular opinion, seemed entirely consistent with the man before me. Joseph Walker had built his success not by chasing existing markets, but by recognizing unmet needs others had overlooked. As Vittorio himself brought our espresso after dinner, he exchanged rapid Italian with Joseph, who responded with surprising fluency. The older man glanced at me with obvious approval before departing with a knowing smile. "Do I want to know what that was about?" I asked, amused by the transparent assessment. Joseph looked momentarily embarrassed. He said, "I've been coming here alone for too many years, and it's good to see me with a beautiful, intelligent woman who appreciates proper risotto." The compliment, filtered through Vittorio's observation rather than delivered directly, brought unexpected warmth to my cheeks. High praise indeed, if proper risotto appreciation is the standard. The highest, in Vittorio's estimation, Joseph confirmed with a smile that reached his eyes. He judges character primarily through food preferences and conversation quality. As Joseph drove me home later that evening, I found myself reluctant for the day to end. Our connection had deepened through shared appreciation of the hotel restoration and the simple pleasure of unhurried dining. The ease between us felt increasingly natural, as if we'd known each other far longer than the few days since our unconventional introduction. When he walked me to my door, another of those old-fashioned courtesies he performed without affectation, Joseph hesitated slightly, his confidence momentarily giving way to something more vulnerable. "I've enjoyed today immensely," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that sent a pleasant shiver through me despite the mild evening, both the tour and dinner afterward. "So have I," I replied with simple honesty. "Would it be too forward to ask when I might see you again?" The question held no presumption, just genuine interest. I found myself smiling at this courtly approach to dating, so different from the casual ambiguity that seemed to characterize modern relationships. "Not forward at all. I'd like that very much." Relief and pleasure mingled in his expression. "Perhaps the Symphony concert this weekend? Brahms is on the program, if I recall correctly." "Saturday evening," I confirmed, impressed that he'd noted my involvement with the Symphony Fund. That would be lovely. As we confirmed details, I was acutely aware of standing at another kind of threshold, not just my physical doorway, but the entrance to something new and unexpected in my life, a relationship developing with natural momentum, built on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than convenience or loneliness. When Joseph leaned forward to kiss my cheek in farewell, the brief contact carried a current of possibility that lingered long after his car had disappeared down the street. Inside, I found Christopher at the kitchen table, laptop open and papers spread around him. He glanced up with obvious curiosity. "The hotel tour extended into dinner, I see," he observed, checking the time. "Must have been quite the restoration project." "It was fascinating," I replied, deliberately ignoring his knowing tone. "The attention to historical detail while incorporating modern functionality is really quite remarkable." "Uh-huh. And the dinner after? Also remarkable architectural discussion?" I felt a smile tugging at my lips despite my attempt at composure. "We happened to be near a wonderful Italian restaurant. It would have been a shame not to experience it." Christopher's expression softened. "It's good to see you like this, Mom. You seem lighter somehow." The observation caught me by surprise. "Do I?" "Yeah." He closed his laptop, giving me his full attention. "For as long as I can remember, you've been focused on everyone else. Me, Emma, Sophia, your volunteer work. It's nice to see you excited about something that's just for you." His perception both touched and unsettled me. Had I really become so self-effacing that my own son had noticed? Had my determined self-sufficiency after the divorce calcified into a life defined solely by service to others? "We're going to the Symphony on Saturday," I found myself saying. "Joseph and I." Christopher's smile widened. A third date, definitely not a coincidence anymore. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself contemplating this new path opening before me. Unexpected, unplanned, yet somehow feeling right in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Joseph Walker had entered my life through the strangest of circumstances, yet our connection had quickly transcended its unusual beginning. Saturday suddenly felt very far away. Symphony Hall glowed with soft amber light as Joseph and I climbed the grand staircase toward the mezzanine. He had insisted on the premium seats, claiming the acoustics were superior, though I suspected he simply enjoyed the privacy they offered compared to the more crowded main floor. "You look beautiful," he said as we reached the top of the stairs, his appreciation evident in his gaze. I'd chosen a midnight blue dress I hadn't worn in years, its simple elegance suddenly feeling appropriate again after long relegation to the back of my closet. "Thank you," I replied, unexpectedly pleased by the compliment. "You clean up rather well yourself." Joseph smiled, adjusting his perfectly tailored jacket with mock vanity. High praise from a woman who's seen me in a construction helmet. As we moved toward our seats, I noticed several acquaintances from the Symphony Fund watching us with poorly concealed curiosity. Marianne Hollister, the board president, caught my eye with a raised eyebrow and approving smile. I'd known most of these people for years, yet had rarely appeared at social functions with a companion. Joseph's presence beside me was undoubtedly providing fodder for discreet conversation. "I believe we're causing a minor sensation," Joseph observed quietly, clearly noting the same attention I had. "Shall I wave, or would that be too theatrical?" His humor put me at ease. "Let's maintain the mystery. It's more interesting that way." Indeed, he guided me to our seats with a light touch at the small of my back. "Though I suspect your friend in the teal jacket is about to spontaneously need to use the restroom just to pass by for a closer look." He was right. Moments after we settled, Eleanor Whitman, Symphony Fund treasurer and enthusiastic purveyor of social updates, made a transparently deliberate detour past our seats. "Abigail, what a lovely surprise," she exclaimed with practiced surprise. "It's been ages since you've attended a performance." "Hello, Eleanor," I replied pleasantly. "I believe we saw each other at the fund meeting just last week." "Oh, of course," she agreed, her attention already shifting to Joseph. "And you've brought a guest? How wonderful." I performed the necessary introduction. "Eleanor Whitman, this is Joseph Walker. Joseph, Eleanor serves on the Symphony Fund board with me." Joseph stood with that old-world courtesy I'd come to appreciate, taking Eleanor's extended hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Whitman. The Symphony Fund's work is remarkable." Eleanor practically vibrated with the networking opportunity that had fallen into her lap. "Mr. Walker, the hotel developer. Why, we've been hoping to approach you about our annual gala. Perhaps you'd consider hosting it at your new downtown property once it's completed." "I'd be happy to discuss possibilities," Joseph replied smoothly. "Perhaps Abigail could arrange a meeting through proper channels next week." His response was perfect. Polite, but firmly redirecting Eleanor's impromptu fundraising attempt to appropriate professional pathways, while simultaneously making clear that tonight was personal, not business. Eleanor retreated with visible reluctance, though I had no doubt the news of Joseph Walker accompanying Abigail Cooper to the symphony would circulate through certain social circles before the first note was played. "Well handled," I murmured, as Joseph resumed his seat. "I've had practice," he replied with a wry smile. "Though, usually it's business opportunities rather than charitable galas being pitched at inappropriate moments." "The hazards of success," I observed. "Among many," he agreed, "though present company makes such minor intrusions entirely worthwhile." The simple compliment warmed me more than elaborate flattery could have. Before I could respond, the house lights dimmed and the conductor appeared to enthusiastic applause. The Brahms Symphony had been a favorite of mine since college, its emotional depth and structural complexity rewarding repeated listening. I found myself particularly moved tonight, perhaps because of the man beside me, perhaps because of my own changing circumstances. The music seemed to speak directly to this unexpected chapter in my life, the gradual awakening of possibilities I'd long ago filed away as no longer relevant. Midway through the second movement, Joseph's hand found mine in the darkened theater, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture both tentative and certain. The simple connection, warm, solid, present, felt more significant than its physical reality might suggest. I tightened my grip slightly in response, an acknowledgement of something unfolding between us that required no words. When intermission arrived, we joined the flow of patrons heading toward the grand lobby. Joseph kept my hand in his, a public declaration of connection that felt both novel and natural. "Your symphony fund has created something truly special here," he observed as we found a quiet corner away from the bustling refreshment tables. "The orchestra is world-class." "The current conductor has transformed the program," I agreed. "When I first joined the board, they were struggling to fill seats. Now most performances sell out weeks in advance. Evidence that excellence, properly supported, will find its audience," Joseph said, his gaze meeting mine with warmth that suggested he wasn't only discussing music. The moment was interrupted by a commotion near the main entrance, raised voices, a security guard moving quickly through the crowd, patrons turning with expressions of alarm and curiosity. "What on earth?" I murmured, standing on tiptoe to see over the gathering crowd. The answer arrived with horrifying clarity as Madison's voice cut through the sophisticated hum of conversation. "I need to speak with Abigail Cooper. It's an emergency about her son." My heart seemed to stop momentarily. Christopher had mentioned dinner with colleagues from the tech startup he was courting for employment. Had something happened? Joseph's expression hardened as he recognized the voice. "That's Madison," I confirmed grimly. "Christopher's ex, who is apparently claiming an emergency involving him," Joseph added, his tone sharpening with concern. "Do you think something's actually happened to your son?" I was already reaching for my phone. "Let me check." Before I could complete the call, Madison spotted us across the lobby. Her appearance was significantly different from our last encounter. Her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged, her designer dress rumpled, her hair disheveled in a way that suggested deliberate disarrangement rather than actual disorder. "Abigail," she called, pushing past a security guard who attempted to intercept her. "Thank God! It's Christopher! He needs you!" Joseph placed himself slightly in front of me, a subtle protective gesture. "Ms. Parker," he acknowledged coolly. "What seems to be the emergency?" Madison faltered momentarily at Joseph's presence, clearly not having anticipated finding us together. She recovered quickly, her expression morphing into calculated distress. "Mr. Walker, Christopher's been in an accident." He asked for his mother. Her voice broke with theatrical precision. "He's at Memorial Hospital." Cold fear gripped me, despite my suspicions about Madison's credibility. I completed my call to Christopher, holding my breath as it rang. "Mom?" My son's voice, perfectly normal and slightly confused, answered on the third ring. "Everything okay? I'm at dinner with the Vertex team." Relief washed through me, quickly replaced by anger as I realized the extent of Madison's manipulation. "You're not at Memorial Hospital? You haven't been in an accident?" "What? No." Alarm colored his voice. "Why would you think that?" "Madison is here at Symphony Hall, claiming there's been an emergency," I explained, watching her face pale as she realized her lie had been exposed in real time. "She said you were asking for me." "That's insane," Christopher replied, his voice hardening. "I'm perfectly fine. Put her on the phone." I extended my phone toward Madison, whose expression now cycled rapidly between defiance and desperation. "He'd like to speak with you." She backed away, shaking her head. "This is all a misunderstanding. I received a call. Someone must have been playing a prank." "Ms. Parker," Joseph interrupted with quiet authority. "Either speak with Christopher now, or I'll be forced to involve security more directly. Creating a false emergency in a public venue could have serious consequences." Madison's composure cracked completely. "This is your fault," she hissed at me, abandoning all pretense of concern. "You've turned him against me. 3 years of groundwork ruined because you couldn't mind your own business." 3 years? I repeated, momentarily confused. "You've only known Christopher for 2 months." A calculating smile spread across Madison's face despite her disheveled appearance. "That's what he thinks. I've been positioning myself in his path for much longer. The startup he's interviewing with? My uncle sits on their board. His favorite coffee shop? I researched his routine for weeks. Nothing about our chance meeting was chance at all. The revelation of such methodical manipulation stunned me into momentary silence. Joseph, however, maintained his composure. "That's quite enough," he said firmly, gesturing to the security personnel who had been hovering nearby. "This woman created a false emergency to disrupt the event. Please escort her out." As security approached, Madison made one final desperate attempt. "You don't understand what's at stake. His trust fund vests on his 33rd birthday, just 3 months away. Do you know how long I've been planning this?" Her words hung in the air, shocking in their naked calculation. I stared at this woman who had targeted my son as if he were nothing more than a financial acquisition, her admission more damning than any accusation I could have made. "Christopher can hear you," I said quietly, holding up my phone where the call was still connected. Every word. Madison's face drained of color as she finally registered the active phone call. Without another word, she turned and fled, pushing past security and disappearing through the main doors before they could stop her. Joseph placed a steadying hand on my arm. "Are you all right?" I realized I was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from retroactive horror at how close this predatory woman had come to permanently entangling herself with my son. "Christopher?" I spoke into the phone. "Did you hear?" "Everything," he confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. 3 years, Mom. She's been stalking me for 3 years, planning how to access my trust fund. "I'm so sorry," I said, inadequate words for such a disturbing revelation. "Not your fault." His voice steadied slightly. "Look, finish your evening, we'll talk tomorrow." "I'm fine," just furious and slightly nauseated at the thought of how calculated this all was. After reassurances and goodbyes, I ended the call, looking up to find Joseph watching me with concern. "Symphony Security is confirming she's left the premises," he informed me, "and I've asked them to alert the parking attendants not to allow her back in tonight." The thoughtfulness of his precautions touched me. "Thank you for everything. Your presence made this much easier to handle." Joseph's expression softened. "Would you prefer to leave? We could find a quiet place to talk, or I could take you home if you'd rather." I considered the option, tempted by the thought of retreat after such an unsettling confrontation. Then I straightened my shoulders, making a conscious decision. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not allowing Madison to ruin our evening. The second half includes the Brahms Fourth, which is my favorite. I refuse to miss it because of her theatrics." Approval and something warmer flickered in Joseph's eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." As we returned to our seats, his hand found mine again, its steady warmth a reassuring anchor after the storm of Madison's appearance. The music, when it resumed, seemed to speak even more powerfully, its themes of struggle, resilience, and ultimate transcendence suddenly personal rather than abstract. By the time the final movement reached its powerful conclusion, I felt restored, not because the disturbing revelation about Madison had faded, but because I had chosen not to let it define the evening. Joseph and I had weathered our first crisis together, his steady presence a revelation in itself. Outside the Symphony Hall, standing close under the portico as we waited for the valet to bring his car, Joseph turned to me with unexpected seriousness. "Abigail," he said quietly, "I find myself increasingly drawn to you. Your grace under pressure tonight only confirms what I've sensed since our first unusual meeting. I'd very much like to continue seeing you, not just for occasional evenings out, but as a regular presence in each other's lives." The directness of his statement, neither pressuring nor ambiguous, took my breath away. After years of careful independence, the prospect of intentional connection carried both exhilaration and trepidation. "I'd like that too," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Though I should warn you, my life seems to have developed unexpected, dramatic elements lately." Joseph's smile returned, warming his entire face. "I find I don't mind a little drama, as long as it's shared with the right person." As his car arrived and we prepared to leave the disrupted but ultimately salvaged evening behind, I found myself contemplating how quickly life could change, how a chance encounter in a jewelry store could set in motion a sequence of events that reopened doors I'd long considered permanently closed. Madison's desperate appearance had inadvertently highlighted something important: the contrast between manipulation and genuine connection, between calculated acquisition and authentic appreciation. In seeking to disrupt what was developing between Joseph and me, she had instead underscored its value. Some lessons arrive in unexpected packages. Sunday brunch had been a tradition in my household since the children were small, a time when electronics were set aside. Conversation flowed freely, and we reconnected as a family amid busy schedules. Though Emma and Sophia now lived across the country, Christopher and I had maintained the ritual when his schedule allowed. This particular Sunday carried additional weight after Madison's disturbing performance at the Symphony. Christopher arrived promptly at 11, his expression more serious than usual as he helped me prepare our traditional spread of Belgian waffles, fresh fruit, and the special herb omelet his father had taught me to make decades ago. "Have you heard from her again?" I asked as we worked side by side in the kitchen. Christopher shook his head. "Not directly, but she sent flowers to my office yesterday with a card claiming she was manipulated by your mother's boyfriend into making those statements." He rolled his eyes. Apparently, Joseph used psychological warfare to trick her into revealing a non-existent plan. I nearly dropped the bowl I was holding. "That's absurd." Joseph barely spoke 10 words to her. "Exactly." Christopher's mouth tightened as he sliced strawberries with unnecessary force. "It's just another manipulation, trying to drive a wedge between us by casting you and Joseph as conspirators against our true love." The audacity was breathtaking. "Do you think she'll continue pursuing you?" "She'd better not," Christopher replied grimly. "I've documented everything. Her staged emergency at the Symphony, her admission about the 3-year stalking campaign, her attempts to isolate me from friends who weren't supportive. My lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter this morning." I blinked in surprise. "You've spoken with a lawyer already?" "First thing yesterday." He scraped the strawberries into a bowl with efficient movements. "What she's done goes beyond a bad breakup, Mom. The calculated targeting, researching my routines, positioning herself in my path for years. It's predatory behavior. The trust fund admission just confirms her motives were never emotional." His clear-eyed assessment relieved me. The Christopher of 6 months ago might have wavered, might have been susceptible to Madison's inevitable attempts at reconciliation. This newer, more decisive version appeared immune to her manipulations. "Speaking of lawyers," he continued, his tone deliberately casual, "I've been reviewing the trust fund situation. Did you know Dad included a marriage clause that would have given any spouse access to 20% immediately upon marriage?" Cold realization washed through me. That's why she was pushing so hard for a quick wedding. Exactly. 20% of my trust would have been hers regardless of how long the marriage lasted. Over $500,000 for simply getting me to the altar. The calculation was chilling. Not just the financial motive, but the patience involved in such a long-term scheme. Madison had invested years in positioning herself to access Christopher's inheritance, treating him as a mark rather than a person. "I'm so sorry," I said, reaching to touch his arm. "No one should experience that kind of betrayal." Christopher's expression softened momentarily. "It's not your fault. In fact, if you hadn't been treated like a VIP at that jewelry store, triggering her mask to slip, I might still be falling for the act." The reminder of how our current circumstances had begun, Madison's jewelry store meltdown, Joseph's unexpected intervention, struck me with renewed force. How differently things might have unfolded without that precise sequence of events. As we settled at the table with our brunch spread, Christopher studied me with unexpected intensity. "So, Joseph Walker, things seem to be progressing." The abrupt subject change caught me off guard. "They are," I acknowledged carefully. "We've been spending more time together." "Mom," Christopher's tone was gently chiding. "You can do better than that." The man faced down Madison's theatrical emergency without blinking, then formally asked to be a regular presence in your life. "That's not casual dating." Heat rose to my cheeks. "You heard that part too?" "Speakerphone," he admitted with a small smile. The Vertex team was curious about the emergency call. We all heard his very gentlemanly declaration. The thought of Christopher and his colleagues listening to that private moment was mortifying, though his evident approval somewhat mitigated my embarrassment. "Joseph is significant," I conceded, searching for words that wouldn't sound either teenage giddy or clinically detached. "We connect in a way I haven't experienced in a very long time." Christopher nodded encouragingly. "And? Details, Mom. Emma and Sophia have been texting me hourly for updates. Apparently, I'm your designated spy, since neither of them can get you to share anything substantial." I laughed despite myself. They've both called. I've been appropriately maternal and private, which is exactly why they're harassing me instead, Christopher complained good-naturedly. At least tell me if you're happy. That's all any of us really want to know. The simple question caught me by surprise. Was I happy? The immediate, uncomplicated yes that rose to my consciousness was answer enough. I am, I said simply. Unexpectedly so. Christopher's smile was genuine. Good. You deserve it. After everything with Dad, with us kids, with your endless volunteer work, you've spent decades taking care of everyone else. It's your turn now. His perception and generosity touched me deeply. For so long, I defined myself primarily through my relationships to others. Wife, mother, volunteer. The idea of prioritizing my own happiness still felt vaguely transgressive, though increasingly right. Thank you, I said quietly. That means a great deal. Just promise me one thing, Christopher added, his expression turning serious again. Don't let Madison's drama affect what's developing with Joseph. She's already taken enough from this family. The insight surprised me that Christopher would recognize how Madison's theatrical disruption might cause me to retreat from emotional vulnerability, to protect myself through distance or caution. I promise, I replied, meaning it completely. Madison has no power over my choices. As we finished our brunch, conversation turned to Christopher's potential new job, his apartment hunting progress, and eventually to Joseph's hotel restoration project. Throughout, I was struck by the subtle shift in our dynamic, my son speaking to me not just as his mother, but as a woman with her own valid desires and identity. It felt like crossing an invisible threshold into a new, more balanced relationship. After Christopher left, I found myself contemplating his observations while tidying the kitchen. My phone chimed with a text message from Joseph. Good morning. Hoping your conversation with Christopher brought clarity after last night's disruption. Would you be free for dinner at my home this evening? Nothing elaborate, just quieter than a restaurant. Let me know if that would be comfortable for you. The invitation represented another threshold, moving from public outings to the more intimate setting of his personal space. The careful wording, making clear both his desire to see me and his respect for my potential hesitation, reinforced everything I was coming to appreciate about Joseph Walker. I replied without overthinking, Dinner at your home sounds lovely. Christopher and I had a good talk this morning. He's taking decisive steps regarding Madison, and he seems quite approving of you, by the way. Joseph's response came quickly. Glad to hear both pieces of news. I'll send my address. Shall we say 7 p.m.? Dress is comfortable casual. Looking forward to seeing you, Abigail. As I moved through my Sunday routine, reading the newspaper, answering emails from Symphony Fund committee members, watering the plants on my sun porch, I found myself contemplating the accelerating changes in my life. In just 3 weeks, I had gone from comfortable predictability to something far more dynamic. A son finally establishing independence, a manipulative, almost daughter-in-law dramatically exposed, and most surprisingly, a relationship blossoming with a man who had entered my life through the strangest of circumstances. The prospect of dinner at Joseph's home that evening carried a weight beyond the simple social engagement it might appear. It represented another step toward something I had never expected to find again at 65, a genuine partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and that indefinable chemistry that couldn't be manufactured or forced. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I found myself genuinely excited about the future, not just accepting of what might come, but actively anticipating it. Life, it seemed, still had surprises in store, even for those who thought their most significant chapters were already written. Joseph's home surprised me. I had expected something grand and imposing, a mansion befitting his success, perhaps in one of the city's exclusive, gated communities. Instead, his address led me to a renovated brownstone in the historic district, its elegant facade maintaining period authenticity while discreetly incorporating modern elements. The interior continued this thoughtful balance between preservation and innovation. Original hardwood floors gleamed beneath carefully chosen lighting. Contemporary furniture complemented rather than competed with architectural details that had been meticulously restored. Art adorned the walls, not the ostentatious status pieces that often populated wealthy homes, but a curated collection that revealed genuine appreciation for various styles and periods. "This is beautiful," I said, as Joseph gave me a brief tour. "Not at all what I expected." "Too modest for a supposed hotel magnate?" he asked with a hint of self-deprecation. "Not modest, authentic," I clarified. "It feels like a home rather than a showcase. There's intention in every detail." Joseph's expression warmed at my observation. That was precisely my goal. I spend my professional life creating spaces for others. This needed to be genuinely mine. The kitchen revealed another surprise. Professional-grade appliances clearly used regularly rather than maintained for show. As Joseph checked something simmering on the stove, the comfortable familiarity of his movements confirmed my suspicion. "You actually cook," I observed. "Not just for special occasions. One of life's essential pleasures," he confirmed, adding fresh herbs to whatever was creating the enticing aroma that filled the space. My mother insisted all her children learn. "Never be dependent on restaurants or other people for basic sustenance," she would say. I smiled at the practical wisdom. My mother taught me for similar reasons, though I suspect her motivations were more about traditional gender roles than independence. "Different era, different approach," Joseph acknowledged. "Though the result is the same, the ability to create something nourishing from basic ingredients." He gestured toward the counter where a bottle of wine was breathing. "Would you mind pouring while I finish this sauce?" The easy domesticity of the moment struck me. The natural way we moved around each other in the kitchen, the absence of performative gallantry that might have had him insisting on doing everything himself, the simple pleasure of shared tasks. It felt surprisingly comfortable for a first visit to his home. Over dinner, a perfectly prepared salmon with a complex sauce that put my own efforts to shame. Conversation flowed with the same ease I'd come to expect in Joseph's company. We discussed books we'd recently read, shared memories of favorite travel destinations, and eventually circled back to the events of the previous evening. "I've been concerned about how Madison's disruption affected you," Joseph admitted, his expression serious. "That kind of calculated drama can be deeply unsettling." "It was," I acknowledged, "though not for the reasons she intended. I was initially terrified something had actually happened to Christopher. Once I knew he was safe, my primary emotion was retroactive horror at how thoroughly she had targeted him." Joseph nodded thoughtfully. "The premeditation is particularly disturbing. 3 years of positioning herself in his path suggests a level of calculation beyond ordinary manipulation." "Christopher has involved his lawyer," I said, relieved again by my son's decisive response. "He's taking it more seriously than I might have expected, which is reassuring." "Good. Clear boundaries are essential with someone that determined." Joseph refilled our wine glasses with the excellent Pinot Noir he'd selected. "And how are you feeling about it all now, a day removed?" The question was characteristic of him, looking beyond surface reactions to my deeper experience, genuinely interested in my perspective rather than simply offering platitudes or solutions. "Grateful, honestly," I replied after considering. "As disturbing as the situation is, I'm grateful it was exposed before Madison could legally entangle herself with Christopher or access his trust fund. And I'm grateful for your presence during the confrontation." Joseph's expression softened. "I'm glad I was there, though I have no doubt you would have handled it capably on your own." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "but it was considerably better not having to." A comfortable silence settled between us as we finished our meal, the kind of quiet that feels connective rather than empty. Joseph seemed as content as I was to simply be present without filling every moment with words. After dinner, he led me to a small terrace overlooking a surprisingly lush garden tucked behind the brownstone. String lights twinkled among carefully tended plants, creating an intimate oasis that felt removed from the city surrounding us. "This is magical," I said, genuinely impressed by the transformation of what must have originally been a modest urban space. "My sanctuary," Joseph replied, settling beside me on a comfortable love seat. "After days of meetings and decisions affecting hundreds of employees and thousands of guests, this garden reminds me of a different kind of responsibility. The consistent care needed to help living things thrive." The philosophy resonated deeply. His recognition that creation and maintenance were equally important, that stewardship required both vision and consistent attention. It aligned with values I'd held throughout my own life, though I'd rarely heard them articulated so clearly by others. As the evening air cooled, Joseph placed a light blanket around my shoulders with thoughtful consideration. The gesture, simple yet attentive, exemplified what I was coming to appreciate most about him. The way he anticipated needs without making assumptions, offered care without creating dependency. "Abigail," he said after a moment, his voice carrying a new note of seriousness, "these past weeks, since our unusual introduction, have been unexpected in the best possible way. I find myself thinking about you throughout my days, looking forward to our conversations, appreciating your perspective on matters both significant and trivial." My heart quickened at his directness, though I remained silent, sensing he had more to say. "At our age," he continued with a small smile, "we've both experienced enough to recognize when something genuine appears. I don't want to rush what's developing between us, but I also don't want to be unnecessarily cautious simply because our connection formed quickly." "I feel the same way," I admitted, the words coming more easily than I might have expected. "There's a clarity to our interaction that's refreshing after years of careful independence." Joseph's hand found mine, his touch warm and steady. "I'd like us to be exclusive, to focus on exploring this connection without the complications of other relationships." The formal request, so different from the ambiguous seeing where things go approach that characterized modern dating, made me smile. "Are you asking me to go steady, Joseph Walker?" His laugh was warm and genuine. "I suppose I am, though that terminology dates us rather precisely, doesn't it?" "Yes, Abigail Cooper. I am indeed asking if you'll be my exclusive romantic interest." "I would like that very much," I replied, squeezing his hand gently. "Though I should warn you, I haven't been anyone's exclusive romantic interest in a very long time. I may be rusty at the role. We can be rusty together," he offered, his eyes crinkling with humor and something warmer, "making up our own rules as we go." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as the evening continued, but a new awareness hummed between us, the recognition of intentional commitment, of choosing each other's company above other possibilities. For someone who had maintained careful emotional independence for 15 years, the decision felt simultaneously momentous and entirely natural. When Joseph drove me home later that evening, the goodbye at my door carried a different weight than previous partings. His kiss, when it came, was neither tentative nor presumptuous, a perfect balance of respect and genuine desire that left me momentarily breathless. "Good night, Abigail," he said softly, his hand lingering on mine. "Thank you for a wonderful evening." "Thank you for dinner," I replied, "and for everything else." He understood my meaning without elaboration, gratitude not just for the meal or the pleasant hours, but for the intentional care, the straightforward communication, the absence of games or manipulation that had characterized so many interactions in my post-divorce dating experiences. Inside, I moved through my nighttime routine with a sense of quiet wonder at how thoroughly my life had transformed in the span of a month, from comfortable predictability to unexpected connection, from maternal concern to romantic possibility, from a life defined primarily by what had ended to one suddenly rich with new beginnings. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself contemplating the strange sequence of events that had led to this moment. How Madison's jewelry store meltdown had inadvertently opened the door to something genuine and meaningful with Joseph. How sometimes the most disruptive moments could lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Life's greatest gifts, it seemed, often arrived in the most unexpected packages. 3 months passed with a rhythm both novel and comfortable. Joseph and I established patterns that wove our separate lives into an increasingly connected tapestry. Tuesday dinner at his home, Friday evenings at cultural events, Sunday brunches that sometimes included Christopher when his schedule allowed. Between these anchor points, we shared spontaneous lunches, afternoon walks, and the occasional workday phone call just to hear each other's voice. My children adjusted to this new reality with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Christopher, having witnessed our connection from its unusual beginning, was openly supportive. Emma, my practical doctor daughter, approached the relationship with cautious approval, asking pointed questions during our weekly calls that gradually shifted from protective concern to genuine interest. Sophia, always my most romantic child, had declared it absolutely cinematic and demanded regular updates on the jewelry store hero who swept you off your feet. They act like I'm a teenager experiencing my first crush, I complained to Joseph one evening as we prepared dinner together in his kitchen. Sophia actually asked if we were Facebook official yet. Joseph laughed, the sound I'd come to treasure for its genuine warmth. And what did you tell her? That people our age announce relationships through interpretive dance, not social media, I replied dryly. She was not amused. Perhaps we should give her something more substantial to discuss, Joseph suggested, his tone deliberately casual as he focused on the vegetables he was chopping. The Walker Grand downtown opens officially next week. The Elizabeth Suite is completed, as is the rooftop garden. I was thinking, he paused, and I looked up from the sauce I was stirring. Yes? I was thinking you might consider spending the inaugural night there, with me. He met my gaze directly, his expression a careful balance of desire and respect. No pressure or expectations beyond what feels right to you. Just waking up together to watch the sunrise from the terrace. The invitation hung between us, its significance clear. In 3 months of growing closeness, our physical relationship had developed with measured intentionality. Passionate kisses, increasing comfort with each other's touch, but always stopping short of full intimacy. Not from lack of desire, but from mutual agreement that this aspect of our connection deserved the same thoughtful progression as the emotional foundation we were building. I'd like that, I said simply, surprising myself with the ease of my decision. Very much. The smile that illuminated Joseph's face warmed me more effectively than any furnace. Then consider it arranged. The official opening gala ends at midnight. We'll have the entire building to ourselves afterward. Very convenient owning the hotel, I observed with a smile. No awkward check-in process. One of the unexpected perks, he agreed, moving to wrap his arms around me from behind as I continued stirring the sauce. Along with excellent room service. The comfortable intimacy of the moment, his chin resting lightly on my shoulder, my body leaning naturally into his, reinforced the rightness of my decision. At 65, I had long ago abandoned the arbitrary timelines and expectations that governed younger relationships. Joseph and I were writing our own rules, moving at a pace that honored both our growing connection and our individual histories. The following morning, I had just finished meeting with the Symphony Fund Committee when my phone chimed with a text from Christopher. Mom, check your email ASAP. Madison's situation has escalated. Don't worry, I'm fine, but you should know what's happening. Concern immediately replaced my lingering contentment from the previous evening. I quickly opened my email to find a message from Christopher with the subject line, FYI, legal has handled this. Attached was a PDF letter from his attorney addressed to Madison Parker. The contents were disturbing. Apparently, Madison had begun contacting Symphony Fund board members, including Marianne Hollister, with claims that I was mentally unstable and being manipulated by a predatory boyfriend. She had suggested that my judgment was compromised and I should be removed from the board for the organization's protection. Additionally, she had somehow obtained Joseph's private email address and sent him a rambling message claiming that I had a history of attaching myself to wealthy men and was only interested in his money and status. Christopher's attorney had responded with an expanded cease and desist letter, threatening immediate legal action if any further contact was attempted with me, my associates, or Joseph. The firmly worded document made reference to documented evidence of Ms. Parker's systematic campaign of defamation and harassment, suggesting Christopher had been collecting proof of her actions. A second message from Christopher arrived as I was processing this information. Legal says she's likely escalating because the previous C&D didn't specify contacting people close to you. This one covers all bases. Joseph already knows. I reached out to him directly when we discovered the email she sent him. Call me when you can. I sat in my car, momentarily overwhelmed by Madison's persistent intrusion into our lives. What had begun as a manipulative relationship with my son had transformed into a vindictive campaign against me personally, apparently triggered by my role in exposing her true nature, and perhaps more significantly, by my evident happiness with Joseph. Before I could call Christopher, my phone rang with Joseph's distinctive tone. I just saw the email from Christopher, I said, without preamble. I'm so sorry you've been dragged into this. Don't apologize for someone else's inappropriate behavior, Joseph replied, his voice calm, but with an underlying steel that I'd rarely heard. Christopher's attorney appears to have the situation well in hand. I can't believe she's now targeting the Symphony Fund board, I said, still processing the extent of Madison's vindictiveness. What could she possibly hope to accomplish? From what I understand of such behavior patterns, it's less about practical goals and more about inflicting pain, Joseph observed. You're happy. She's not. That's intolerable to someone with her particular psychology. His clinical assessment helped me step back from the emotional impact of Madison's actions. You're probably right, though it's disturbing to be the target of such focused negativity. Would you like to have dinner tonight? Joseph asked, his tone softening. Not our usual Tuesday arrangement, but perhaps you shouldn't be alone with this fresh development. The offer touched me deeply. His recognition that emotional support might be more valuable than problem-solving in this moment. I would appreciate that, though I assure you, I'm more irritated than upset. Even irritation deserves good wine and better company, Joseph replied. Shall I pick you up at 7? After we disconnected, I called Christopher, who confirmed what the email had conveyed. Madison's attempts to damage my reputation had been swiftly addressed by his legal team, with documented warnings that any further contact would result in immediate legal proceedings, including potential restraining orders. I'm sorry she's shifted her focus to you, Mom, Christopher said, genuine regret in his voice. This is all because of her original fixation on me. It's not your fault, I assured him. Madison's behavior is her responsibility alone. After a moment's hesitation, I added, though I admit I'm curious how she obtained Joseph's private email address. That's not exactly public information. Christopher's sigh carried clearly through the phone. That's actually concerning the legal team as well. It suggests either sophisticated research skills or the involvement of someone with access to non-public information. The implication was troubling, that Madison's resources might extend beyond what we'd initially assumed. Do you think she could be dangerous? Beyond these harassment tactics? The lawyer doesn't think so, Christopher replied, though with less certainty than I might have hoped. Her type typically avoids direct confrontation or anything that could have criminal consequences. They prefer psychological warfare, making accusations, spreading rumors, attempting to damage relationships and reputations. Still, I said thoughtfully, perhaps extra caution is warranted until we're certain this latest cease and desist has the intended effect. Agreed. Just be aware of your surroundings for the next few weeks, and let me know immediately if you receive any direct contact from her. After our call ended, I found myself sitting in my car, contemplating the strange trajectory that had brought us to this point. What had begun as Madison's calculated pursuit of Christopher's trust fund had somehow morphed into a vindictive campaign against me personally. The intensity of her focus was disturbing, though I took some comfort in Christopher's assessment that her type typically avoided direct confrontation. That evening, Joseph arrived at my home precisely at 7, a bottle of excellent wine in hand and concern evident in his expression despite his warm smile. "How are you really?" he asked once we were settled in my living room, glasses of Cabernet on the coffee table between us. "Honestly? More angry than frightened," I admitted. The idea that she would approach my colleagues with fabricated concerns about my mental stability is deeply offensive. Joseph nodded. Understandably so. Though from what Christopher shared, the Symphony Fund board members who received her messages were more concerned about her stability than yours. This made me smile despite my lingering irritation. Marianne did call to make sure I was aware of the situation. She described Madison's message as concerning in its intensity and assured me that no one took the accusations seriously. "A testament to your reputation and standing in the community," Joseph observed. "Madison fundamentally misunderstood the strength of your relationships if she thought anonymous accusations would undermine decades of demonstrated character." His perception helped shift my perspective from personal affront to recognition of the ineffectiveness of Madison's tactics. My standing with the Symphony Fund and other community organizations was built on years of reliable service and genuine connection. A desperate attempt to undermine that foundation was unlikely to succeed. "What about her message to you?" I asked, still troubled by this direct attempt to damage our relationship. "Christopher mentioned she sent something to your private email," Joseph's expression hardened momentarily before settling back into its usual composed warmth. A rather transparent attempt to create doubt about your intentions, suggesting you have a pattern of targeting wealthy men and that I'm merely the latest victim of your supposed gold-digging tendencies. Despite the seriousness of the situation, I couldn't help a small laugh at the absurdity. Yes, my decades of volunteer work and modest lifestyle clearly indicate a master plan to trap unsuspecting millionaires. Precisely why it was so ineffective, Joseph replied with a smile. Anyone who knows you, or has spent more than 20 minutes in your company, would recognize the accusation as completely inconsistent with your character. As we transitioned to preparing dinner together, a simple pasta dish assembled from ingredients in my refrigerator, I felt the tension Madison's actions had created gradually dissipating. Joseph's steady presence and uncomplicated support provided exactly the balance I needed, taking the situation seriously without allowing it to overshadow everything else. The irony, I observed as we sat down to eat, is that Madison's attempts to damage our relationship have actually highlighted its strength. 3 months ago, this kind of external stress might have created uncertainty or distance between us. And now? Joseph asked, his expression warm with interest. Now it feels like something we're navigating together, I replied simply. A shared challenge rather than an individual burden. Joseph reached across the table to take my hand, his touch conveying understanding beyond words. That's the definition of partnership, isn't it? Not the absence of difficulties, but the commitment to face them as a united front. The observation resonated deeply, a reminder that relationships were tested not only in moments of celebration, but in how they weathered unexpected storms. By that measure, what Joseph and I were building showed remarkable resilience for its relatively young age. As we finished dinner and moved to the living room with fresh glasses of wine, Joseph's phone chimed with a message. He checked it briefly, then turned to me with an expression of pleased surprise. The final inspection of the Elizabeth suite was completed today, a few days ahead of schedule, he said. The entire hotel is officially ready for next week's grand opening. That's wonderful news, I replied, genuinely happy for this milestone in a project that had been so personally meaningful to him. Elizabeth must be thrilled. She's suitably unimpressed, Joseph said with affectionate humor. Her exact words were, "It had better be ready, given what you've spent on it." My sister has never been one for effusive praise. I laughed, having heard enough about Elizabeth to recognize the dynamic. Family keeps us humble. Indeed they do. Joseph hesitated briefly, then continued with a hint of uncertainty I rarely witnessed in him. I was wondering, would you consider changing our plans slightly? The suite is ready now, not just next week. We could have our special evening after dinner on Friday rather than waiting for the official opening. The invitation, spontaneous rather than carefully planned, carried a different energy than our previous discussion. There was something appealingly impulsive about adjusting our timeline, about seizing the moment rather than adhering to a predetermined schedule. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself again with the ease of my decision. Friday sounds perfect. Joseph's smile conveyed both pleasure and something deeper, perhaps appreciation for my willingness to embrace spontaneity alongside our usual thoughtful planning. Then consider it arranged. I'll have everything prepared. As the evening continued with comfortable conversation and eventually a lingering goodnight kiss at my door, I found myself contemplating the unexpected journey of the past 3 months. From a chance encounter in a jewelry store to a relationship that had quickly become central to my daily life. From Madison's manipulative presence to the stronger connection that had emerged partly in response to her machinations. Life's strangest detours, it seemed, sometimes led to the most meaningful destinations. Friday evening arrived with the particular glow that sometimes accompanies significant transitions, a quality of light that seems to acknowledge the threshold being crossed. I packed an overnight bag with deliberate care, selecting items that balanced practicality with the specialness of the occasion. Joseph had arranged for a car to collect me at 7, insisting that I deserved to be chauffeured rather than driving myself to our special evening. The gesture was characteristic of him, attentive without being overwhelming, thoughtful in ways that enhanced rather than restricted my independence. The Walker Grand Hotel stood illuminated against the darkening sky, its restored facade a testament to Joseph's vision and attention to detail. Though the official opening remained a week away, Soft lighting revealed the building's architectural features, showcasing the careful balance of historical preservation and modern functionality that defined the project. Instead of the temporary entrance I'd used during our tour, the driver pulled up to the main doors, which opened to reveal Joseph waiting in the otherwise empty lobby. He wore a charcoal suit that complemented his silver hair, casual elegance rather than formal stiffness. "Welcome to a very private preview," he greeted me, taking my overnight bag with one hand while offering the other to help me from the car. Currently, the hotel's only guests are its owner and his very special companion. The lobby was even more impressive than during my tour, now fully furnished with period-appropriate pieces that complemented the restored Art Deco details. Fresh flowers occupied strategic locations, their subtle fragrance enhancing the atmosphere without overwhelming it. "This is extraordinary," I said, genuinely awed by the transformation. Seeing it complete after witnessing the restoration in progress makes it even more impressive. Joseph's expression warmed with evident pleasure at my appreciation. That was my hope, that experiencing the during would make the after more meaningful. He guided me toward the elevator, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back. "Dinner is arranged in the Elizabeth Suite. I thought you might prefer privacy for our evening, rather than the main restaurant." The thoughtfulness of this arrangement touched me, recognition that while we were comfortable in public together, this particular milestone deserved intimate space without external observation. The Elizabeth Suite took my breath away all over again. Now fully furnished and styled, the two-story space balanced luxury with genuine comfort. The sitting area featured soft lighting from vintage-inspired fixtures, while the dining table near the windows was set for an intimate dinner for two, complete with candles and fresh flowers. Most striking, however, was the terrace beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Joseph had transformed it into a private garden oasis, potted plants creating natural boundaries, string lights casting a gentle glow, and a small fire feature providing both warmth and ambient light in the evening air. "Joseph," I breathed, momentarily overwhelmed by the evident care he had invested in creating this setting. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined." "I wanted our first evening here to be special," he said simply. "A proper beginning for this new chapter." As we moved to the terrace for pre-dinner champagne, the city stretched before us, lights twinkling as dusk deepened into evening, the distant hum of traffic creating a gentle background rhythm. Despite being in the heart of downtown, the space felt like our own private world, elevated above the bustle below. "A toast," Joseph suggested, raising his glass, "to unexpected beginnings and second chances." "To jewelry store rescues and impromptu marriages," I added with a smile, clinking my glass against his. His laugh, warm, genuine, one of the first things I'd been drawn to about him, filled the space between us. Certainly the most unusual introduction I've ever experienced. "I've been meaning to ask," I said, curiosity finally overcoming propriety. "What made you intervene that day? You could have simply alerted security or the store management." Joseph considered the question thoughtfully. "Instinct, primarily. Seeing Madison's aggression toward you triggered something protective I didn't entirely understand in the moment." He paused, his expression softening. "Though I admit, I'd noticed you earlier, browsing near the vintage section. Something about your grace and self-possession caught my attention. When I heard the commotion and realized it involved the elegant woman I'd been surreptitiously admiring, the response was automatic. The revelation that he had noticed me before the confrontation, had found me appealing independent of the dramatic circumstances, warmed me unexpectedly. "So you weren't just being chivalrous to any random woman being accosted," I teased gently. "You had ulterior motives, entirely honorable ones," he assured me with mock seriousness, though I hadn't planned to introduce myself as your husband quite so abruptly. We laughed together at the absurdity of our beginning, how a moment of spontaneous intervention had set in motion everything that followed. As dinner was served by a discreet staff member who appeared and disappeared with professional efficiency, our conversation continued to flow with the ease that had characterized our relationship from the start. Over exquisitely prepared courses that showcased the hotel's culinary program, we shared stories we hadn't yet exchanged. My early ambitions to become a concert pianist before practical considerations led me toward business administration, his first failed hotel venture that taught him more than his subsequent successes. my complicated relationship with my ex-husband that had eventually transformed into distant cordiality for our children's sake. "I've been wondering," Joseph said as we lingered over dessert, "if you ever heard anything further from Madison after the cease and desist letter?" I shook my head. Complete silence, which is something of a relief. Christopher's attorney believes the threat of legal action was finally enough to penetrate her self-absorption. "I'm glad," Joseph replied, his expression serious. Her fixation was concerning, particularly when it shifted from Christopher to you. "I suspect she saw me as the primary obstacle to her plans," I observed, first for exposing her behavior to Christopher, then for apparently moving on to happiness while she was thwarted. "A fundamental misunderstanding of cause and effect," Joseph noted. "Your happiness came from your own choices, not from her disappointment." The insight struck me as profoundly true. Madison had viewed life as a zero-sum game where her success required others' losses. What she couldn't comprehend was how genuine connection created expanding possibilities rather than competing interests. As we moved from the dining area to the comfortable seating near the fireplace, Joseph refilled our wine glasses one final time. The atmosphere between us had shifted subtly, the easy conversation now interwoven with an awareness of the evening's natural progression, of the sweet that surrounded us with its obvious implications. "I've been thinking," Joseph said, setting down his glass and turning slightly to face me directly, "about time and how differently it feels at our age compared to when we were younger." I tilted my head questioningly, intrigued by this philosophical turn. "In my 20s and 30s, he continued, time seemed abundant, almost unlimited. Decisions could be postponed, opportunities deferred, relationships explored at leisure, because there would always be more time ahead." I nodded, recognizing the perspective he described, the illusion of immortality that accompanies youth. Exactly. But now, his expression grew more intent, I find myself acutely aware of time's value, not in a morbid sense, but in a way that clarifies priorities and eliminates patience for anything less than genuine connection. His hand found mine, warm and steady in its gentle pressure. "What I'm trying to say, perhaps inelegantly, is that these months with you have brought a clarity I wasn't expecting at this stage of life, a certainty about what matters and who I want to share my remaining journey with." My heart quickened as I recognized the direction of his words. "Joseph, I'm not proposing marriage," he clarified with a small smile. "At least, not tonight. That feels like a conversation for another moment, after more time together. But I am proposing intention, a deliberate decision to build a future together, whatever shape that might take." The distinction touched me deeply. His recognition that commitment could exist without immediately defaulting to traditional structures, that at our age and stage, we could define our relationship on our own terms. "I would like that very much," I replied, my voice steadier than the emotion rising within me might have suggested. Building a future together, deliberately and intentionally. Something shifted in Joseph's expression, relief, joy, and a deepening tenderness that made him appear somehow younger and more vulnerable than his usual composed self. "I love you, Abigail," he said simply. "I didn't expect to feel this way again at 68, but here we are." The words, direct, unembellished, genuine, unlocked something I had been holding carefully controlled within myself. "I love you too," I replied, the declaration feeling both momentous and entirely natural, more than I thought possible at this stage of life. When he drew me closer, his kiss carried a new quality, not just affection or desire, but a promise of continuity, of chosen connection, extending into whatever future we might create together. Later, as we stood on the terrace watching the city lights shimmer below us, Joseph's arms encircled me from behind, his chin resting lightly on my shoulder, in a posture that had become comfortingly familiar over recent months. "What are you thinking?" he asked, softly. "About unexpected trajectories," I replied honestly. 3 months ago, I was a 65-year-old widow with a predictable routine and limited expectations for my personal future. Then Madison created a scene in a jewelry store. You intervened with that outrageous husband claim, and somehow we ended up here," he completed, tightening his embrace slightly. "Two people who might never have met otherwise, finding exactly what we didn't know we were looking for." The observation captured perfectly what I'd been struggling to articulate: the beautiful improbability of our connection, formed through circumstances neither of us could have anticipated or planned. Life's strangest detours sometimes lead to the most meaningful destinations, I murmured, voicing the thought that had been recurring throughout our evening. Joseph turned me gently in his arms, his expression carrying a depth of emotion that needed no verbal elaboration. "In that case," he said softly, "I'm profoundly grateful for unexpected detours." As we moved inside, closing the terrace doors against the cooling night air, I found myself filled with a quiet certainty that had been absent from my life for many years. Not the youthful confidence that assumes permanence and perfect outcomes, but the mature recognition that genuine connection, however it arrives, deserves to be honored, nurtured, and celebrated. The future would bring its inevitable challenges. Madison might reappear with new schemes, though her power to disrupt had diminished with each unsuccessful attempt. Christopher would continue his journey toward greater independence and responsibility. Emma and Sophia would adjust to their mother, having a significant relationship beyond their family circle. Joseph and I would navigate the practical questions of how to blend our separate lives into a shared future. But tonight, in this beautiful space that represented Joseph's vision and care, those considerations belonged to tomorrow. Tonight was for recognizing the extraordinary gift we had stumbled upon through the strangest of circumstances. A second chance at partnership, at joy, at the particular intimacy that comes from being truly seen and valued by another person. As Joseph led me toward the bedroom, with its sweeping views of the city now transformed into a tapestry of lights against darkness, I reflected on how thoroughly my expectations for this chapter of life had been upended. The comfortable predictability I had accepted as my portion had given way to something far richer, a relationship that honored my past while opening doors to an unanticipated future. Second chances, Joseph had called it in his toast. But it felt like more than that. Not merely another opportunity at something familiar, but the discovery of possibilities I hadn't known to look for. A first chance at something entirely new, arrived at through the accumulated wisdom and self-knowledge that only decades of living could provide. Whatever label might apply, one thing was certain: Madison's jewelry store meltdown had inadvertently delivered the most unexpected and precious gift, a beginning disguised as an ending, a future unfolding from what had seemed a closed chapter. Sometimes, it seemed, life's most beautiful offerings arrived in the most improbable packages.
You know, before I end this video, I want to talk to you for a moment. Not as a narrator, not as someone telling a story, but just as someone sitting across from you, reflecting on what we just experienced together. Because stories like this, they don't just come and go, they stay. They linger in your mind, in your chest, in that quiet space where you start asking yourself questions you didn't expect. I remember the first time I came across a story like this. It wasn't dramatic in the way movies are. There were no grand speeches, no perfect endings, just the woman facing things that felt impossibly heavy, and yet somehow she kept going. Not because she had all the answers, not because she wasn't afraid, but because something inside her refused to give up. And I think that's what makes stories like the one you just watched so powerful. It's not about perfection. It's not about always winning. It's about endurance. It's about what happens when the world tries to defy you, limit you, silence you, and you still choose to stand. Even if your voice shakes, even if your steps are slow. The women in these stories, they're not just characters. They represent something real, something that has existed for generations, strength that has been passed down, even though pain, courage that show up, even when it feels like there's nothing left. And if you really think about it, how many times has that kind of strength gone unnoticed? How many stories were never told? How many voices were never heard? That's why this channel exists, to create a space where those stories are not just told but felt, where every moment of struggle matters, where every act of courage, no matter how small, is seen, and where rising again and again becomes something worth honoring. Maybe there was a moment in this story that hit you a little differently. Maybe it reminded you of someone you know. Maybe it reminded you of yourself. And if it did, I hope you hold on to that. Because strength doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks like surviving one more day. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it looks like starting over when everything in you is tired. But it's still strength and it still matters. So as you leave this video, don't just move on to the next thing right away. Sit with this for a second. Think about the journeys you just witnessed. Think about what it represents. And most importantly, remember that every story like this is the reminder of something powerful. That no matter how many times someone is pushed down, no matter how many systems try to break them, there is always the possibility of rising again. If this story meant something to you, I'd love for you to stay with us on this journey, because there are so many more stories waiting. Stories that will challenge you, move you, and maybe even change the way you see the world just a little bit. Thank you for being here with me, truly. And until the next story, take care of yourself, keep your heart open, and never forget how powerful it is to rise, even when it's hard. Bye.